Hi friends, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going over every book that I read in April. There's a total of 5 here. April's not over yet, so I might read 1 or 2 more before the month is over. It is currently the 27th. I am filming this video a little bit in advance, so there might be 1 more book that I read this month that I don't include in this video. But if that is the case, then I will include it in a future video so you guys will know for sure what I read. So far, as of now, I read 5 books in April. I'm hoping in future months that number will be more, but I just got back into reading this month, and it wasn't until about halfway through the month that I really started to dedicate a lot of time to reading. Really, it's only like 5 books in half of April. Hopefully my May wrap up will be larger, but I do want to share the books that I read, my thoughts on them, what I rated them. This video is going to be completely spoiler free, so no worries on that end. Also, I'm really hoping that I'll be able to read more books in May because this month, April, has been my last month of school. I'm a junior in college, and so after April, I will be done with school, so I can dedicate a lot more time to reading. With that being said, let's recap what I read this month. I am going to talk about the books in the order that I read them, except for 2 of them because they were part of a series, so I'm going to talk about them together, and I'm going to talk about them first. So the first 2 books that I read were Once Upon a Broken Heart and The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber, and these covers are just absolutely everything. I really love these books. I'm not big into fantasy, but I feel like these are the perfect books to read if you're not a pro at reading fantasy and you really want to get into reading like fairy tale fantasy. The world building is really easy to understand, it's not too complex, and the characters are really easy to follow. Their backgrounds are easy to understand. One thing I really liked about these books is that the author does an amazing job of making you care about the characters and kind of making you invest in the characters and their relationships. So I really enjoyed that aspect of these books. There is a romance in these books, but I feel like it doesn't really come to life until the 2nd book. There's not a ton of like romance scenes in the 1st book that really like grab you, but this book does have a lot of good romance scenes, so I really like that. I love when fantasy has romance in it. I feel like it really helps me care more about the characters and like invest in their future. But also I really liked the character development that took place in this book. I felt like one of the main characters, we got a lot more of his background and his story in this book, which I felt like this book was more focused on the female main character and her backstory. But yeah, this book was really good in that it really set the scene and it brought a lot of context into the story. I ended up rating this one at 4.5 stars. I felt like this had really strong writing and it provided a lot of necessary context for the story, but also like introducing us to the world in a way that was understandable and made sense. And this book I gave 5 stars. This book was only one of 2 of the books that I gave 5 stars this month. I really loved this book. I felt like my eyes were glued to the page from start to finish. I finished this book in less than a day. I was so excited to read it. This was a lot more character driven, I feel like. Although it was motivated by the plot, I would just say that I personally found this to be more character focused. Also, there were some plot twists in here that I was not guessing and I had no idea were gonna happen, so I really appreciated that factor. I really like when I can't predict what's gonna happen in a book and it kind of takes me by surprise because I feel like that means that it's like really good writing and it's not predictable. So yeah, this book is a 5-star read. I totally recommend this series if you want to get into fantasy and you don't want something too daunting or too confusing, because trust me, fantasy has been like my genre of fear. In terms of like what this book is about, I've just been kind of talking about what I thought about it. Basically, there's a girl named Evangeline. Her like true love is about to marry her stepsister, and she thinks that he's been cursed. So she is so heartbroken over this that she decides to go pray to the Prince of Hearts, whose name is Jax, and he's a fate, which means that he's pretty much like, he has a lot of power that, you know, normal people don't, and he's kind of like magical in that way. And so she makes a deal with him that he'll stop the wedding if she gives him 3 kisses. Basically, like, she has to kiss 3 people whenever he says, and they are of his choosing. And then we get this whole adventure that unfolds after that, in the aftermath of her choice to make a deal with him. There's a lot of adventure in this book. It's a lot of magical fairy tale elements. So it's basically all built upon the deal that she makes with the Prince of Hearts. and kind of what happens as a consequence of that. I can't really get into the plot of this book without giving anything away, so I'm just gonna be very general. This book picks up right where this one left off. We follow the main characters as they're going on another adventure, and this time it's even more adventure, I would say. There's a lot more settings in this book, and there's a lot more like journeys. We get introduced to a few new characters, but also, like I said, we get a lot more background information about some of the side characters, and we kind of learn how they're important to Evangeline's story. These books are amazing. I'm obsessed with Stephanie Garber's writing, and hopefully I'm going to be reading Caraval soon. But yeah, 4.5 stars, 5 stars. After I read Once Upon a Broken Heart, I read Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I have heard so many amazing things about this book. I kind of went into it with high expectations because of that. I felt like everybody who had read this book absolutely loved it. Almost everyone I know, even people who aren't really into reading a ton, have read this book in anticipation for the show, and I just never got around to reading it, so I decided to read it this month. It was a pretty quick read, I will say. It didn't take me too long to get through it, but guys, I didn't love this book. I felt like it was really good, but I didn't have that 5-star quality for me. I gave this book 4 stars. I felt like it was overhyped, and maybe I just had too high of an expectation of like how it would be in my head, where like when I actually read it and went into it, I was a little bit disappointed. I just felt like there was a lot of toxicity within the characters, and granted, I know that that's kind of the point of the story, but it was really frustrating to me that they just seemed to keep making mistakes that were quite obviously mistakes. I also don't love the main male character in this book. His name is Billy. I really don't like his character. I felt like I couldn't relate to him. I felt like his internal moral struggles were not relatable and were hard to justify. I don't know. I get that the point of this book is that there's supposed to be some moral gray areas, but I just wasn't vibing with it because I just felt like there were so many things that were so obviously mistakes or that were annoying or just wrong. They just kept making those mistakes over and over again. And it wasn't just Billy, it was also Daisy. I just felt like I couldn't relate to either of the characters. My favorite character in this book ended up being Camilla, and if you've read this book or know the story, you are probably gonna understand why. I feel like she was the voice of reason. I just had a really hard time with this book. Billy was just so annoying, and he just made so many decisions that were annoying. And also like him, like in his head, when we got to see like what he was thinking through like his dialogue, I just felt like I could not relate to it. I feel like the issues that he was battling like in his head were just so obvious. It was so obvious like what was right in that situation, and yet it seemed like he was just trying to justify a lot of his problems and a lot of his behaviors the whole time. Granted, I loved the setting of the book. I loved the parts of the book that were focused on the writing process and also like them making music as a band. I loved that aspect of it, and I loved how it was set in the 70s. I loved the feel of that. I was invested in the story, and I did finish the book quite quickly, so that's why I gave it 4 stars, because like overall I liked the book, but I just felt like there were some things that were a little bit hard for me to get behind. I didn't really like the main character. So those are the reasons that I rated it at 4 stars instead of 5 stars. Like I feel like everybody else rated it at 5 stars. I liked the book. I found it really easy to get through. Anything that was about the music and the band and, you know, living in the 70s, I loved that. I felt like the writing was really good. The descriptions were really vivid and clear, and I felt like I was almost like in the 70s with them, like at a bar listening to them perform. But it was just like the personal things between the characters that kind of just frustrated me, and that's why I felt like I couldn't give this a 5 stars in good faith. So after I read Daisy Jones and the Six, I decided to pick up Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings, and I gave this book a 4.5 stars. I really loved this book. Now, if you are going to read this book and you haven't read it yet, I'm just going to let you know that these characters are so toxic. They are so toxic. It is a toxic relationship. And this is kind of like a second chance romance trope, kind of. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's giving very much Gossip Girl vibes. It's giving like rich kids and their love life. And I was hooked. I read this whole thing really fast. I liked the characters because they were like complex. And I felt like, almost in contrast to Daisy Jones, I felt like I liked these characters a little bit more because there were things that they did that I didn't like or I didn't relate to or I found to be really wrong. But also there were aspects of their personality that I did relate to. And so it made it easier for me to kind of like understand their motivations and like why they do things. Whereas like in Daisy Jones, I felt like some of the characters, I just totally couldn't relate to anything about them. So I felt like I had nothing to connect to. Whereas these characters, like even though they do make some really bad decisions, I feel like I saw more like humanity in them. I don't know. I really liked how Jessa Hastings built up this relationship and gave us context over the span of the book. She didn't just like tell us all of the history of the main characters at the beginning and then get into the story. I really liked how she would tell something that was going on in the present and then somehow connect it back to something that happened in the past. And so we get little tidbits here and there throughout the entire book of how they got to where they're at now. And I really liked that aspect of it. I felt like it kept me drawn in because I was just like, oh, what happened? Like, and then finally, like when it was explained, it made so much sense and it really connected everything. And the ending ripped my heart out. I was like literally in pain. It is so frustrating to read this book because I feel like there's just such a back and forth, but the ending just really, it made me so emotional. I was almost brought to tears, and I know that when I read Daisy Hates, I am going to be in tears. I just know. But yeah, there's just something about the way that Jessa Hastings is able to tell this story about rich 20-somethings that makes it so compelling, but also makes you care about the characters and makes you kind of see yourself in them. I feel like this book really appeals to the hurt that everyone has experienced, and I think this specifically appealed to me because there is a huge theme of like forgiveness and letting go. I myself struggle sometimes with letting things go and moving on and, you know, forgiving things that have happened or even forgiving myself. So reading this, I felt like I could really relate to the characters and understand where they were coming from. So yeah, I gave this 4.5 stars. I really recommend this. The only reason I didn't give this a 5 stars is because it was kind of frustrating, and I'm pretty sure that she's self-published, so I totally understand why this happened. But there are some like spelling and grammatical errors here and there throughout the book. They're very few and far between. I think there was like maybe like 5 in total in the book. But every time I saw one, I just kind of like, ugh, like it's just kind of an ick for me with books. So that's the only reason I gave this 4.5 stars out of 5, because I just felt like that kind of, I couldn't stop thinking about them once I would see one. But can we just please take a minute to appreciate the cover? It is absolutely beautiful. I just love them. And the last book that I read in April, I might read another one, but just as of now, as of April 27th, it's Beach Read by Emily Henry. I can't believe I hadn't read this yet, but I really loved this book. This is kind of like an enemies to lovers romance. I will say that a lot of people, including myself, don't like calling the trope enemies to lovers. I feel like it's more of like grumpy sunshine. It's almost like they just like kind of don't like each other, or they just like have a iffy past and then they like become lovers. I feel like that's more what the trope is in romance novels, and then enemies to lovers is more like fantasy. I feel like these characters were really easy to love and understand. Emily Henry just has such a good writing style where like you really like pick up the emotion off the page. I feel like this was kind of a slow burn romance. It took a while to like get into the romance, like it was past the 100-page mark, but I really loved the way that she built up the relationship, and it wasn't just like, oh, like right away they're just gonna start like shacking up. But I really liked that she took the time to give all the characters a backstory. I loved the side characters. I thought they were so cute and quirky and fun, and I loved the setting. I feel like the setting really came through in this book, which was obviously really important because it is called Beach Read, and I feel like Emily Henry really always nails the setting in books. I feel like even when I read People We Meet on Vacation, I felt like the setting was really clear. I was able to like effectively picture where events were taking place while I was reading the book, which is a huge problem for me because I feel like a lot of books, if the setting isn't clear, I have no idea what's going on and I can't picture where things are going on. But yeah, I love the premise of this book. Basically, it is about 2 authors. The girl is named January and the guy's name Augustus, but she just calls him Gus throughout the book. They wind up living next to each other in beach houses, and for different reasons, and they are both struggling to write a book, so they decide to strike a deal where January, who usually is an author of romance books, challenges Gus to write a romance book, and Gus, who usually writes like American novels, like Hemingway-esque, things like that. He challenges January to write a book that he would usually write. So basically they're writing books in each other's genre, and then from that, romance grows. I gave this book a 5 stars. I felt like it was everything that I wanted and needed from a romance. I felt like the story was interesting and unique, and it wasn't something that I've read before in romance, which can be an issue because I feel like a lot of the tropes can become super repetitive, but I love when somebody puts a new spin on it. And I really also liked how much background information we got about the characters, because like I said, sometimes in romance, I feel like it just focuses so heavily on the romance for the entire book that it's like, I don't even know anything specific about the characters, and I don't know why I should care about them. But I feel like Emily Henry does a really good job of telling us who the character is, why they're in this position, and then also I love the way that she just writes about romance. I think it's so magical. It's really captivating. So I'm just so happy that I've read another one of her books. And next I'm gonna read Book Lovers, and then I'm gonna read Happy Place, which just came out and I just got it at the store the other day. I'm really excited. I really loved this book. These are all of the books that I read in April. Hopefully my May wrap up is going to be a little bit longer. The next video that you guys are gonna see on my channel is going to be my May TBR, and I'm gonna do a little fun challenge thing with that, so look out for that. That should be up next. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed the books that you read in April. Let me know what you read this month in the comments. Let me know if you read any of the books that I read in April and what you thought of them, because I'd love to hear what you thought and if you agree or disagree with what I said. That's gonna be all for me today. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, morning, night, evening, whatever time of day you're watching this video. I hope you guys have had a good day or are going to have a good day, and I will talk to you in my next video.